Well, I'm going to start by telling you a story. It's a true story. It's a bit of a love story. And it involves, first of all, Eric. Eric was born to Swiss parents who were serving as missionaries in what was then northern Rhodesia, now Zambia. So Eric was born in Livingston, northern Rhodesia. The boy grew up there. He really knew no other life other than the life of a missionary kid. In his late teenage or early 20s, Eric developed a desire also to be a missionary. And he had his heart set on Muslim people groups whom he loved very much. So he set his mind on a course of theological studies, researched the colleges around Europe, and finally chose the BTI, which is short for the Bible Training Institute in Glasgow. That's Eric. Violet was born in England, lived there until her father, who was a market gardener, was offered a job in Scotland, looking after the market garden of Malcolm Campbell, a national retail fruiterer. Violet became a secretary when she left school, and there was within her a growing sense of a call to be a missionary among Muslim people. So she signed up for a course in theology at the Bible Training Institute in Glasgow. And now you can see where this is going. Eric and Violet met, fell in love. I'm sure they talked about their sense of independent call to be missionaries. Violet considered that being a secretary, or secretarial training, would not be of much use if she was going to the mission field, so she changed course and went to take a nursing degree in Aberdeen. Well, eventually Eric and Violet were married. They spent 2 weekends on honeymoon in Largs before Eric moved to the French Cameroons, as they were called then. And he began to cut a clearing out of the bush, literally, cutting away the bush and building a mission compound. Meanwhile, Violet completed her nursing degree back in Scotland before joining him out there, I think a year later. Strange way to start married life. There followed a lifetime of service to the Lord. In the mission compound, Violet set up a dispensary to which the locals came to seek relief and cures from all kinds of ailments. Meantime, Eric could communicate with the local people in French, which was his first language, born in Switzerland, or from Swiss parents rather. But he soon realized that unless he had Bibles in the local dialect, it would be difficult to effectively spread the gospel to the people who needed to hear it. Well, he resolved to translate the New Testament into Fulani, or more correctly, Fulfulde. If only he had a secretary. Well, of course he had. And together they translated the New Testament into Fulani, a book which incidentally is still used in the schools in Cameroon. Now, I hope you see quite easily the point I'm trying to make here this morning. Who would ever have imagined that a Swiss boy living in Africa would meet an English girl living in Scotland, and years before God would have seen and planned that their gifts would have been so dovetailed and used in such a remarkable way? Now, it's not always as clear as that, of course, but we're seeing here what is called the providence of God, as he as he works out his purpose in the individual lives of people. And this says much about the God we worship, and it really ought to have a huge impact on the way we think, to know that there is a God who has that providential care over us. Now, allow me to say, as an aside, it doesn't contribute much to the message, but Eric and Violet, the Reverend and Mrs. Eric Rowley, out there in the Cameroons in 1941, were expecting their first child. And for some reason, they made the hazardous journey from West Africa, Cameroon, down to northern Rhodesia, now Zambia, to the town of Livingston, where Violet gave birth to twins, coincidentally, in the same town as her husband Eric had been born 30 years before. You can't make this up. And one of the twins there, born that day, is my wife, Norma. Eric and Violet are Norma's parents and my parents-in-law. That's why I know so much about the story. And the remarkable providence of God in all of this and more has become a precious part of our family history. We talk about it and enjoy it and remember it, and as we look to the way God led through thick and thin, through good and bad. And what we're about this morning is the briefest look at the astounding providence of God. Providence is a difficult word. Difficult because in most translations of the Bible it only appears once, and that not a terribly helpful context. Difficult too because it encapsulates more than one idea. It has, for example, the concept of foreknowledge, foresight, and alongside that, providence has the same derivation as the words provide or provision. Encouragingly, in English, the word providence has become associated only with God. Not surprising. Who else could know in advance? Who else could foresee events? Who else could provide the way he has done? And so the word providence has no other application other than God. It is a God concept. It's a biblical doctrine. And the Collins English Dictionary helpfully defines the word as God's foreseeing protection and care of his creatures. God's providence, then, is the way that God provides for and cares for his creation, and especially his people, partly by and through his divine foresight. Well, these are strange words for me, as brought up in a council house in Carluke, so let me just speak the language of Carluke. Because God knows what's coming next, because God knows what's round the next corner, he is able to provide to us what we need for the next part of our journey. Is that any better? And the Bible is full of this, you know. I wish we had time to just do a character study on the life of Noah, or Abraham, or Sarah, or Jacob, or Joseph, or Ruth, or Moses. Take Moses, for example. Well, it's too long a story to tell about Moses, because we would need to go back nearly 400 years to get the start of the story. The start of the story, a father with a flaw. He favoured one of his children above the rest, and his siblings tried to kill the favoured one, but instead sold him as a slave into Egypt. But the Hebrew slave became the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and second in command in Egypt, and was a key figure, you see, in bringing the Israelites and moving them in large numbers into Egypt, which was important for for the story as we fast forward 400 years. And the bit of the story where a loving mother saves her baby boy's life by hiding him in a basket in the bulrushes beside the River Nile, which in time results in the bizarre situation that a Hebrew boy is living in Pharaoh's palace, for a time looked after by his own Hebrew mum and then by Pharaoh's daughter. But inside, Moses has become, you see, increasingly aware of his ancestry and his history, until eventually he could not reconcile the riches of the palace, the privileges of it, with his duty to help his beleaguered people. So he left the palace, left the luxury behind. And then very soon after that, he saw a Hebrew slave being badly beaten by an Egyptian master. And Moses snapped. He could watch this no longer. And he hit the Egyptian and killed him. And when to his horror he discovered that the incident had been seen, he fled and became a shepherd in a remote hillside. For nearly 40 years, being a shepherd was his work and his hiding place in Midian. It's an amazing story, with good bits and bad bits to it. Then there's a burning bush, you see. It's a piece of biblical drama at its best. The shepherd in this lonely hillside suddenly becomes aware of a bush that's burning, but not burning, so he goes to investigate. God was about to call this runaway shepherd to lead the flock of nearly 2 million of his people out of Egypt into the land that he had prepared for them. What a wonderful thought. The Jewish boy, trained and educated in all manner of skills in the palace in Egypt for over 35 years. And then for another 40 years, he's at the bottom of the food chain, learning the discipline of another kind of leadership, a shepherd in the dry, dusty terrain at the foothills of the mountains in Midian. And the prince come shepherd becomes the most loved prophet of all time. It's the providence of God, you see. God foresees and foreknows 400 years or 10 seconds before they happen. Yes, we love to trace the divine guiding hand in our lives or in the lives of others. We love the concept. I love the concept of the providence of God when things are coming together. I like it when life makes sense. But what if they're not? What if things are falling apart around us, as they seem to be right now? I don't need to list the things. You watch the news. That's it. What if we're saying, I don't see the hand of God in the world right now? It might be a cry from a personal point of view. If you're facing some workplace conflict or a serious health issue or severe financial constraints or a divisive family dispute, we're inclined to ask under our breath, where is the providence of God now? I thought you said he would provide for me. I attended an all-day conference last month. The speaker facilitator at one stage pointed out 4 areas in the room and said, this is spring, this is summer, this is autumn, this is winter. And she invited us to go and sit where we were most comfortable, to the season that we liked the best, and talk among yourselves, she said, about why you like that season the best. Well, we did. Most gravitated to spring, summer. Quite a few went to autumn. One went to winter. She received our feedback. And then she said, imagine that these seasons represented our spiritual lives, our moods, our hopes, our joys, our sorrows, our worship. And she began to go through them one by one. I wondered, what's she going to say about winter? Well, what she said about winter was that a couple of years earlier she had applied for a job in a Christian organisation based here in Scotland. She described how she struggled with it. She didn't know if she was doing the right thing. It was kind of impulsive, and she had plenty of reasons for not doing it. But eventually she went. She left England, left her friends, left her church behind, came to Scotland, hardly knowing if she'd done the right thing. She said it was a winter experience for her. But then, you see, that's the problem with God's providence. We don't see it in the moment. So she cautiously began to try to settle in her new surroundings and to reflect on how this move had come about. And suddenly, she discovered, as she looked back, all sorts of events and enablers and incidents and happenings that had happened along the way, that had brought her to this place. You see, under the ice, God was working, and it was only when figuratively spring arrived that God's work in the earlier months came into view. The guiding hand of God had been working all along. And she said that winter had become for her a spiritual positive. She wakes in its mornings, tries to imagine, to envisage what God in His providence might be planning, unknown to her, beneath the surface, to make her life better. That was Eric and Violet's experience. God's providence was unseen and unknown to them for years, until they could look back and see the providence of God. Then step by step, Eric's DIY skills to build a mission compound with mud bricks, French as his first language, his theology studies, his preaching skills, Violet's secretarial experience, her nursing training, would all combine to enrich their service for God. Well, I love to talk about the providence of God, but there's something on my mind. And I guess it could be condensed into this. I'm concerned about our young people. I'm concerned about our young people today. I don't mean the young people of this church. I don't even mean just my own children or grandchildren or the children in our street. I mean the children in general who are in the moment people. They don't have the patience to wait 10 or 20 years or 10 or 20 minutes at times to see the hand of God in them. And they're looking around the world and they're watching the news and they're on their iPhones and they're saying, where is God in all of this? Where is God now? Where is God now in this bleak, no hope world? And what have we got to look forward to, they're saying. Don't talk to me about the providence of God. Let me add a layer to this. I once had I'm looking for the best word possible. I once had the inestimable privilege and pleasure of spending a little time with Michelle Guinness, Messianic Jew, converted Jew, became Christian. And I turned to her book often, but I spent a little time with her when I was on holiday in France. And she writes some good books, and in one of her books, she writes about Rabbi Hugo Grimm. And here are her words. I once interviewed for a television documentary the wonderful Holocaust survivor, Rabbi Hugo Grimm. I had the naivety, said Michelle, to ask him, where was God in Auschwitz? Wrong question, he replied. I'll tell you a story. I was only around 15 years old at the time, in the hell of Auschwitz. But on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, I went behind the sheds at Auschwitz and wept until I became aware of a quiet presence with me, weeping as if his heart would break. We paused, writes Michelle, to absorb the implications of this extraordinary experience. Then Hugo Grimm continued. You asked me where God was in Auschwitz? He was there. He was there, with his people, suffering every humiliation and indignation and pain that were forced on them at that time. The question is not where was God, but where was man in Auschwitz? For as God looked at the perpetrators of such a heinous crime against humanity, didn't he ask himself with a broken heart how the creatures that he had created with such love, such hope, such potential could descend to this? And here we are today, Israel and Gaza. Don't ask, where is God? Ask, where is man? Where is the man that God created with such love? Let's think in broader terms for a second as I draw this to a close. Leave the horror of it behind. Let's resolve to be the kind of men and women that God created us to be. Salt and light in a broken world. Let's begin where we are. We won't change the world in a week. But let's dwell in the providence of God. Expect that God has seen us and known what we need. And in his generosity and his providence will give to us what we need. Hebrews 11:1, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. That's the nature of the providence of God. Often we don't see the gift until later, but we can try to enjoy it now. Well, he's given us life and breath, and sun and rain, and growth and harvest. We're talking about the only one who saw you in your mother's womb. He was with you at birth. He was with you at childhood. He was with you in adolescence. He was with you in adulthood. When you went to school, he was there. When you bought your first car. When you were appointed to your first job. When you fell in love for the first time. When you married or set your course in singlehood. He was there in times of failure and sadness and joy and hope and celebration. He was there. God's providence has been with us. Here's what we need to tell our young people. Here's what we need to tell our young people and ourselves. That when everything looks bleak and cold, God is working unseen beneath the surface of the ice. And in his providence might break in upon us, as he did with Moses, with the emblem of deity, to give us purpose and hope. God is working for our good in this winter of conflict and disappointment. Well, I'm just a visiting preacher, so I have no right to ask you. But I wonder if you would be willing to take a risk this afternoon or tonight. It has some risk to it, what I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask you, would you be willing to sit down on your own in a quiet room and review your life? Open yourself up to recall the providence of God in your life. Pause and look back and try and trace your journey. Don't spend too much time on the bad stuff. Rejoice in the good stuff. Ask the question, how did we get to this place in our lives? Relive the good times. And the chances are that we will discern an unlikely but distinct trail of the hand of God throughout your life. God was there all the time, and he is now. Tell the young people the future's good because God is here. Then we will have the confidence to walk forward in faith. For the God that gave us life has protected us and provided for us thus far. That God, the only God, is on the throne. May you enjoy the providence of God today. Well, we're going to sing another hymn. It's Great is Thy Faithfulness, number 200 in the book if you're using the book. We'll stand and sing, and we'll come to communion.